proven crucial in responding to the many needs that arise in the aftermath of natural disasters.
Gentleman from California.
15 more seconds. You got to give me 15 more seconds.
An additional 30 seconds for the
Gentleman's
gentleman.
recognized 30 seconds.
Transporting displaced students is an allowable purpose under the Social Security's block grant, and I encourage HHS and affected states to work with affected schools districts and promptly provide any reimbursements for these critical services.
I thank the gentleman very much. I want to thank you and the staff from the majority and the minority for helping to work out this solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Recognize gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Palazzo, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in favor of the Sandy relief packages being considered today. I want to thank Chairman Rogers and the Appropriations Committee for their work to bring this bill to the floor in a responsible manner and address many of the concerns that some in this body had. I also want to take this opportunity once more to thank my colleagues for their work on yesterday's Sandy Relief Improvement Act that brought much-needed reforms for our disaster relief systems. This bill that passed the House unanimously is a good first step in streamlining the disaster relief process and saving the country money and lives. These are the kinds of common-sense reforms that must continue to be a part of the disaster relief conversation. A little over a week ago, I voted against adding more debt to a failing system without reforms. Many of my colleagues joined me in that vote, and I know some still have reservations about the package before the House today. I've spoken to many of these colleagues. I understand concerns about the fiscal state of our nation. I understand your position, and I respect your vote. But while we continue to do the responsible thing by looking for ways to pay for future disaster relief, we must do what is necessary to help those in the Northeast, and we must do it now. Let me just say, a vote for yesterday's reform package would pass the House unanimously, and a vote for today's relief package allows us to move forward in a way that begins to address much-needed reforms while at the same time providing the immediate relief that Sandy victims so desperately need. I saw those needs up close and personal when I visited some of the hardest-hit areas of New Jersey and New York last week. It brought back vivid images of Hurricane Katrina and the destruction that my home state of Mississippi experienced 7 years ago. Districts like those of my friends Congressman Runyon and Congressman Grimm are similar to those along the Gulf Coast after Katrina. Their constituents experienced a terrible natural disaster, and they need our help. So today, we consider provisions that provide immediate relief for Sandy victims while allowing them to build forward, not just back. That will strengthen these communities in the face of future storms. We cannot wait another 7 years. We cannot wait until the next disaster before we take up these reforms. Today's vote for immediate relief is about giving the Sandy victims the help they need now. It is vital to the recovery efforts of the Northeast. It is vital to making our communities more resilient, and it is vital to ensuring better preparedness and response to future storms. So I urge my colleagues to support the disaster relief package. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Chair, I am delighted to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished Dean of the New York delegation, Mr. Rangel.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lowy. I want to thank Chairman Rogers for the manner in which he's handled this crisis, and certainly congratulate Ms. Lowy for the leadership that she has provided this House over the years, but especially at a time when we needed her the most, that she was there to bring the people together, Republicans and Democrats, to do the right thing. I want to thank, too, and encourage the new members of Congress to take advantage of this great opportunity they have to see what the House of Representatives is all about, notwithstanding the bad publicity that we get. For whatever reasons, the 112th Congress failed to respond to what was a part of the feeling and the fabric of this great body, where every American would know that if ever they were involved in a crisis, earthquakes, floods, or fires, that they could depend on their colleagues in the House of Representatives to respond. It was never a question of whether they were Democrats or Republicans, whether they came from a red state or a blue state. It was, how fast can we help? And you can depend on that help. For whatever reason, the 112th Congress failed. But now we ask the new members to join with those that were here before in bringing together people in this Congress to once again rebuild that reputation that we had so rightly enjoyed, and that is that if you have any type of problem in this great nation and you need the help of your colleagues, you can depend on the House of Representatives, the people's house, in coming forward to provide those aids. We cannot bring back the lives, the homes, and the hopes that so many people have lost. But we can say, in the people's house, we respond to the problems that people have. I thank you again, Ms. Lowy, for your leadership that you provided, and I look forward to working with you and Chairman Rogers in the future.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky.
May I inquire, Madam Chair, of the time remaining?
Gentleman from Kentucky has 14 minutes remaining. The gentlelady from New York has 12.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Gardner.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chairman Rogers. And last week I offered an amendment in the House Rules Committee to add additional funding for emergency watershed protection program to be used for any area that had a designated major natural disaster. It's an important program that allows for watershed and infrastructure restoration. Many parts of the western United States were devastated by wildfires last summer, including areas in my district, the High Park Fire, near Colorado Springs, the Waldo Canyon Fire. In Colorado alone, there were over 100,000 acres of land burned on both private and federal land, as well as over 600 homes destroyed in these fires. The EWP program will help communities in other areas of the United States rebuild and prevent future damage to people and property. Unfortunately, this bipartisan amendment, offered with other members of the Colorado delegation, did not get through the Rules Committee process, and so it will not be considered on the House floor today. The tragedy caused by Hurricane Sandy necessitates assistance from the federal government, but it's also important that disaster assistance be available to other areas that experienced natural disasters, particularly those when it comes to federal lands. I ask the chairman to consider working with me and other members for wildfire restoration.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will yield.
First, I want to thank the gentleman from Colorado for his work on the emergency watershed program. I'm aware of the need for this assistance not only in Colorado, but in other parts of the country, and I look forward to working with you and others to address this important funding in future legislation.
I thank the chairman for his work and his support, and I yield back my time.
It's back. Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Chair, I am pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman, Mr. Moran.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's nice to welcome the new ranking member of the Full Appropriations Committee, who, as good fortune would have it, also hails from New York and fully understands what's involved here. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's what all the members of this body should ask themselves. If they were in the situation of the states that were so severely impacted by Hurricane Sandy, how would they vote? The fact is that natural disasters are occurring with more frequency and with greater severity. And so there's a very good chance that in nearly every congressional district in this country, this may happen to you. And of course, when it does, property values go way down. In fact, billions of dollars can be lost, certainly were with Hurricane Sandy. So where does the municipality get the money to repair? Likewise with the state. The only place you can turn to is the federal government. That's why we are here. E pluribus unum. We're in this together. So this is not about the Northeast versus the rest of the country. One part of our body, if you will, of states has been severely injured. We need to repair that damage. Now, within the Interior and Environment Appropriations There's money for wastewater and sewer treatment projects, things that have to be done. We have to provide that money. I think we have about $1.5 billion to do that. Certainly if we accept the Rogers-Frelinghuysen amendment, and this bill is whole with that amendment, which we should strongly support. There's an amendment to require to take away Mr. Frelinghuysen's effort to allow a waiver on historic preservation. Well, yes, it should be done. These localities don't have that kind of money. And a lot of the revenue coming into these economies is coming from tourism. They come to see historic structures. They come to see the way that many parts of the Northeast were when we were building the foundation of this country. That money should be made available in whole with federal dollars. Mr. Frelinghuysen's amendment is right on point. It needs to be included. So I know I'm getting to the, I've got a good speech written by Rick Healy to thank you. We've got wonderful staff, but the fact is this is an opportunity for this entire...
I'm pleased to yield another minute.
Another minute. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. The fact is that this is an opportunity to show what we're all about. Do unto others as we would have them do unto us. Let's make this money available. Let the Northeast repair itself, heal itself, get that economy back on its feet, start returning revenue to the federal government. The fact is that these Northeast states contribute more to the federal treasury than they get out of the federal treasury. So let's get this done. And we want to recognize the Chairman Rogers' supplemental, the very good work that Mr. Frelinghuysen from New Jersey has done, and of course, Ms. Lowy, this is a good bill. It's urgent that we pass it. Let's get this done. These negative amendments that try to take away money to make ideological points simply are out of order right now. Let's heal this wound. Let's let this economy in the Northeast get back on its feet, and we'll all be better off as a nation.
Expired.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
I reserve.
Gentleman continues to reserve the balance. Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Chair, I am very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey who's been extraordinarily helpful in trying to sort out the challenges on this bill.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Andrews.
Recognized for 2 minutes. Without objection.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I thank Chairman of the Appropriations Committee and my friend for working together to bring this product to the floor. I've heard 2 objections to this bill. The first is that money is spent in the wrong places, and the second is the amount of money altogether is too costly. Let me try to address those objections. The money being spent in the wrong places, I would respectfully request that members who have that objection read the legislation. Because throughout the legislation, when it refers to the money to be spent, it says that the money is to be spent on, I'm quoting, necessary funds related to the consequences of Hurricane Sandy, end quote. Now, there's one exception to this that I've read, and it is limited to situations where there were prior disasters that are not yet cleaned up. So this is a bill that deals almost exclusively with the Sandy disaster, and to the extent it does not, deals with lingering problems in other parts of the country from those disasters. To those who would argue that the amount of money in the bill is just too much to begin with, I would offer you this question. If you're running a business and you had 100 manufacturing plants and sales offices around the country, and 15 of them were shut down by a storm, so 15% of your available revenue was no longer available to you, what would you do? You'd repair those 15 manufacturing facilities and sales offices as quickly as you could in order to restore the health of your company and the growth of your revenues. That is exactly what this bill does. The taxpayers of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey, 3 states, contribute more than 15% of the individual and corporate tax revenues collected in the United States of America. 15% from 3 states. If you shut down that engine of production, the whole country suffers. I would ask the gentlelady for 30 more seconds. I thank the gentlelady.
Madam Chair.
This is an occasion for the House of Representatives to rise above normal parochial politics. When the disaster struck the Gulf, we were all Mississippians or Louisianans. When tornadoes hit Missouri, we were all Missourians. When there have been earthquakes hit the west coast of our country, we were all citizens of California. We are asking members from coast to coast throughout our country today to look at themselves and walk in the shoes of New Yorkers and citizens of Connecticut and New Jerseyans. If we understand that we have a common purpose, that this legislation does focus almost exclusively on the Sandy disaster and then focuses what it does not focus on Sandy on other disasters, and we understand that 15% of the economic engine of this country is at risk of being shut down, then we will all be people who cast the same vote and the right vote, which is yes. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Chair, I am delighted to yield 1 minute to our distinguished leader and who has been such an advocate for the assistance to New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, understanding that every part of the country has catastrophes and we as Americans have a responsibility, and I thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I congratulate her on assuming the ranking position on the Appropriations Committee and how good it is for our country and for the people affected by Superstorm Sandy that Congresswoman Lowy, now Ranking Member Lowy, is in the position she is in to fight for their needs as the senior Democrat on the Appropriations Committee. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you, Mr. Rogers, for yours as well. This should be a day that we shed all of our disagreement about political differences and the rest, and come together to prayerfully meet the needs of the people of our country. Whether it's California with earthquakes, drought, fire, flood, whatever, whether it was Iowa with the floods, Missouri was so affected, Joplin, of course, Katrina emblazoned in our minds as a challenge, and Hurricane Ike on the heels of that. We all across our country have experienced natural disasters which have had a direct impact on the lives of the American people. I really do believe that for all the purposes that people send us to Congress or elect us to public office, whether it's a county executive or a member of Congress, they expect us to do what is right for them when they are most in need of our help. Many things we can do for ourselves, but some things are just beyond the most determined, resourceful, operational person to do, and that is when a natural disaster strikes. So while we have had our conversations about what should be in the bill and how the bill should be bifurcated, or in this case trifurcated, and the rest of it, let us hope that when we have this vote today, it will sweep away some of the concerns that people have about whether this assistance is going to actually show up. 79 days since Hurricane Sandy struck the region. And a 1-2 punch. Last year it was Irene, who struck much of the same area, and some of the people haven't really fully recovered from that, whether it was a small business owner or homeowner or whatever. And now Sandy is just a tremendous force. Others have talked about how do you mitigate for such a thing? How do you address issues that relate to climate change? We'll save that conversation for another day, but recognizing its importance in this discussion. How do you mitigate for rebuilding? And that's important in terms of the resources that we're putting to bear on this problem. So let us today try to extract from the minds and the hearts and souls of the people who are affected any thought that the assistance will not be there. They know there's a lot of making up they have to do to restore the lives and businesses and homes that they had before. They should also know that when we say, let us pray for the victims of Hurricane Sandy, we're just not saying a prayer and say that should be a substitute for us honoring our commitment as a country to our people, but that our prayers are accompanied by our best intentions and our best actions, not just words, for them. This is one of the longest delays in congressional action in response to a major natural disaster in recent history. For many of us, again, who've ever seen or can confirm the aftermath of a hurricane or tornado, an earthquake, whatever, we know that every single day is too long to wait. Hope can never come fast enough. We cannot let another moment, hour, day go by without giving the biggest possible vote of confidence and hope to the people of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and some, I understand, in Pennsylvania. So we've had our say. We made our points known. The justification has been established. The documentation of need is clear. The bipartisan support of the Governor of New Jersey, the Governor of New York, the Governor of Connecticut, and others stands ready to implement these resources with the most integrity, the most effectiveness, certainly the most speed. Witness the actions of Mayor of New York. I smile when I say that because mayors, they just like to get a job done, and governors too. So let us, as these executives and county executives and the rest weigh in, let us do our part to honor the social compact that we have with the American people, that federal government will be there in time of natural disaster, that this is an emergency and we recognize it as so, and that we honor the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of the people affected by it. So I hope that we can have an overwhelming bipartisan vote, because from a practical sense, I think that ideally, and with our sense of idealism, that would be the right thing to do. But it's a practical matter. You just never know what Mother Nature may have in store for you in your region, and you would certainly want the embrace of the entire nation around you in your area, for your constituents, for your communities, for our country. So I urge a very strong bipartisan vote. I thank our colleagues on both sides of the aisle for making this vote today possible, and urge an aye vote and yield back the balance of my, or yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
I am very pleased to yield 3 minutes to Mr. Crowley of New York, whose district has really seen incredible damage, and he understands the impact of Hurricane Sandy and the people, the community, and businesses. Mr. Crowley.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. I thank the gentlelady for yielding me such time. In the days following Superstorm Sandy, many of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle reached out to me, and I think they did the same to others throughout the Quad State region, expressing their sympathies and their concern. While they weren't able to see firsthand the devastation, everyone had a sense, I think, of that devastation by the footage they all saw on television and over the internet. It was pretty powerful in of itself. Everyone, I think, was astonished at the magnitude. We're not so used to having such disasters in New York City. And as everyone was shocked to see the extensive damage, homes literally wiped away, businesses destroyed, floodwaters consuming people's living rooms and completely overturning their lives. And the damage wasn't just in one city or one town or, for that matter, one state. From Breezy Point, Queens, to Edgewater in my district in the Bronx, from Manhattan to Brooklyn to Staten Island to Westchester to Long Island, from the coasts of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, all the way over to Connecticut. So many people's lives were wrecked by this powerful storm. And while words are kind, and they're very much appreciated, action behind those words are even more appreciated. And today, finally, I believe we'll have the opportunity to see action. 79 days later, and far too much politics in between, this Congress is doing what the people of these communities need and what the American people demand, taking action. I'm thankful to this Congress. I'm thankful that it's finally taking the action to help the people of my district and the millions of other people hit hard by this enormous storm. I want to thank all of my colleagues from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania for our shared commitment to getting this done and never letting partisanship surrounding this debate divide us. A special thanks to Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer and Ranking Member Nita Lowey, and along with their staffs, who have driven this process from day one. I want to thank you both. This bill will provide direct assistance to communities devastated by Superstorm Sandy. It will help restore and replace damaged or destroyed infrastructure, and it will put in place cost-saving measures to prevent further damage when and not if future storms occur. I would just urge any of my colleagues, Democrat or Republican, who are considering voting against either the Freeling Housing Amendment or the overall bill, to just for a moment put yourself in one of your colleagues' shoes. I don't wish Superstorm Sandy or anything like it on any of my colleagues anywhere in the United States. But the one thing you need to know is that if this happens, that your country will be there for you. The damage, the physical damage, but also the mental damage that people are experiencing because they think their country has forgotten. Don't forget these people. Do the right thing. Vote for this bill.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Kentucky reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Chair, I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from a neighboring district in New York who suffered a great deal. He saw the pain and the loss of property and homes all throughout the region. Mr. Engel.
New York's recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. I thank my dear friend, Congresswoman Lowey, for yielding to me. And I urge all of our colleagues to support the aid for the Hurricane Sandy victims. You know, we have a lot of disagreements in this Congress. We talk about issues, about spending, about taxing, offsets and whatever. But, you know, those are issues. Those fights on those issues should be left for another day. It shouldn't be intermixed with the fight to get aid to the Superstorm Sandy victims. They should not be innocent pawns in this fight that we have in Congress. I've been in this Congress for a while now, and I have voted for aid for all regions of our country, be it Katrina, be it floods and tornadoes. We didn't even think twice because that is what Americans do. We help other communities, help other Americans when there are natural disasters. New York is a donor state. We actually send more money to the federal government than we get back. And we do it because it's the thing that we have to do. But now it's our turn. Now we need help. And so now we say to the rest of America, please help us the way we helped you in your hour of need. The constituents in my district in Westchester and the Bronx and my former district in Rockland County are hurting very, very much. These are real people with real lives and real difficulties. So I beg my colleagues, please, don't vote for any poison pills that will kill this legislation. One of the things that's really irksome is when some of my colleagues who stood up and when they had natural disasters in their district begged us for help, and we gave it to them, now are voting against giving help to the people of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. It's just not right. We can argue what role the federal government should play, whether it's just too big or too small or whatever, but no one should argue against the fact that when Americans are in need, the federal government has a role in stepping in and helping them and providing for their needs. That's all we're asking for today. I urge my colleagues to support all the aid for Hurricane Sandy and to reject any of the amendments that would take it away. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I have no further request for time. I'm prepared to close if the gentlelady is prepared.
That's fine. And then, do I go?
Gentlelady from New York has 30 seconds remaining.
Mr. Chairman, I'll respond in 30 seconds, and then I'd be delighted if you close. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to again thank you and Chairman Frelinghuysen for your hard work on this bill. And I would like to address all those who are not sure about how they're going to vote on this bill. And I would like to clarify the way this appropriation works. When you have huge disasters, transit systems, tunnels, thousands of homes that have to be repaired, you need that money committed before you can engage any contractor, any builder in a contract. Now, as you and I know, Mr. Chairman, we've worked a long time on that committee, and before a dollar goes out, the person has to be responsible for every dollar that is committed, that they've spent and that they're going to spend. So we're not just writing an open check. We're just not opening our checkbook. We're responding to these tremendous needs, and I do hope we can get a bipartisan vote for this effort. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I urge an adoption of the Rogers Amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill should be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in Part A of House Report 113-1. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except the amendment printed in Part B of House Report 113-1. After disposition of that amendment, the Chair shall put to the question on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. If the amendment in the nature of a substitute is printed in Part A of House Report 113-1 accompanying House Resolution 23 is not adopted, the committee shall rise and report that it has come to no resolution on the bill. If the amendment in the nature of substitute is adopted, the amendment in the nature of substitute shall be considered as the original bill for the purpose of further amendment. No further amendment shall be in order except the amendments printed in Part C of the House Report 113-1. At the conclusion of consideration of the amendments printed in Part C of House Report 113-1, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments if may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House or any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill, to the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in Part A of House Report 113-1, or to Amendment Number 1 printed in Part C of House Report 113-1. Each amendment printed in Part B and Part C of House Report 113-1 may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment except as specified in House Report 113-1, and shall not be subject to a demand for the division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1 printed in Part B of House Report 113-1. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B amendment printed in House Report Number 113-1, offered by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 23, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to the Chairman and the Ranking Member. I want to make it very clear what this amendment is and what this amendment is not. This amendment is not about delay. This amendment is not about offering a poison pill to the underlying bill. This amendment is not about preventing money from going where it is very desperately needed. I want that to happen. I want these folks who need this money to get it. I live in an area that is hurricane prone. I have lived through hurricanes myself. I have lived through floods myself. I have waded through chest-high water full of snakes and human waste to get into my own business. I have been able to take advantage of and to use to rebuild a small business disaster loan. I want the money to go where it needs to go. I'm here for one reason and one reason only today, Madam Chair, and that is to talk about how we can pay for it. That's it. There was a time when we didn't have to have this conversation. There was a time back during Hurricane Hugo in the late 1980s where we didn't have to talk about how to pay for disaster assistance because the deficit was only $3 trillion. But we so badly mismanaged our money after that, but by the time we got to Hurricane Katrina in 2005, that we actually did start talking about offsetting and paying for disaster relief, and paid for and offset about 40% of it. But we didn't learn. We didn't learn from those mistakes, and we've continued to mismanage our money and to run up our deficit to such a point now where it's $16 trillion today, and it is incumbent upon us to have the discussion about whether or not we have the money to do this, and whether or not it's important enough to us to pay for it. I wish very much that we weren't here today. I wish very much that we could pass this and easily borrow the money without any questions whatsoever. But we've wasted that opportunity. We've mismanaged our own finances to the point where we are now no longer capable of taking care of our own. Think about that for a second. In the United States of America, we do not have enough money to take care of our own citizens who need it. There's no rainy day fund. There's no savings. What ability we had to borrow money, we blew through several years ago with trillion-dollar deficits. We don't have enough money saved up to take care of our own people, and that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. It is important to me that this money goes to the folks who need it very badly. It's so important to me that I think we should pay for it. I think we should be willing as a body to come together and say, look, there are things that we do not need this year, things that we can do without this year, so that the people in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut and the other states who so badly need the money can have it without us having to go hat in hand to other nations of this world and say, would you please lend us money so that we can take care of our folks who need it so badly. I hope the amendment passes. I hope the amendment passes so that I can vote for the bill. I want this money to go where it is so desperately needed. But the time has come and gone in this nation when we can walk in here one day and spend $9 or $17 or $60 billion and not think about who's paying for it. This is important money. It's important to you, it's important to me, it's important to everyone in here. But it's important enough for us to pay for it ourselves. And for that reason, I encourage passage of this amendment and passage, ultimately, of the underlying bill. With that, I'll yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Madam Chairman, it seems we've lost the battle over all of the non-emergency, non-Sandy spending in this measure. The question before us now is whether we're going to spend $17 billion in this bill, $50 billion when it's amended, without even pretending that we can pay for it. Mr. Mulvaney's amendment proposes that we actually recognize that our government is facing a fiscal crisis of unprecedented dimensions and at least pay for the $17 billion in the Rogers bill. Now, I don't like across-the-board cuts which treat our highest priorities the same as our lowest priorities, but the Rules Committee disallowed Mr. Mulvaney's specific offsets like repealing remaining TARP funds and ending bonuses to federal employees who take transit to work. And the fact is, if members believe that a 1.6% cut to discretionary spending is draconian, they should be just as leery of a 1.6% increase in spending to pay for non-emergency, non-Sandy-related programs in the Rogers bill. In the last 10 years, inflation and population have grown 39%, our revenues have grown 37%, but our spending has grown 64%. In light of that, a 1.6% cut to pay for this bill, which we're assured is our highest priority, seems like a very modest measure. I yield back.
Gentleman from South Carolina.
I'd like to yield
reserve.
45 seconds to the lady from Wyoming.
Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized 45 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Without question, the victims of Sandy deserve relief. They deserve it. And we should give it to them in a way that we can afford. If we can't do a 1.6% reduction in spending, how are we going to deal with a $16 trillion debt? My own state of Wyoming is cutting spending 6.5% across the board right now to balance the budget because revenues didn't materialize that have materialized in the past. And it's very doable. We in this House cut our own budgets 11.4% in the period of 2 years. This House has not missed a beat. Not a single member was hurt by that. 1.6% reduction in federal spending to pay for these victims' benefits that deserve this money is the right thing to do. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back in support of the Mulvaney Amendment.
Madam Chair, we'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
To claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And, Madam Chair, I recognize myself for 3 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Our people in the Northeast are facing a struggle of historic proportions. Many have seen their homes, their livelihoods, their communities decimated beyond belief. It's the federal responsibility, and in fact our responsibility as human beings, to help those victims in this unexpected catastrophe. In doing so, we must expend some federal dollars. I don't take spending this money lightly. Our country faces a deficit crisis, as the gentleman from South Carolina has said, a deficit crisis of huge proportions, with an economy that's fighting to recover, and any expenditure must be weighed against all other needs facing our nation. Now, I don't take the back seat to anyone when it comes to cutting spending. Since I've chaired this committee the last 2 years, we've cut $100 billion off of discretionary spending. 2 years in a row, going on a third. That's not happened since World War II. So I know whereof I speak. In this case, Madam Chair, the needs are very desperately clear. We must provide this emergency funding, as we are allowed by law, without the devastating slash-and-burn cuts elsewhere that this amendment would cause. The amendment before us would slash nearly $20 billion from discretionary spending this year alone, totally indiscriminate, unspecific, cutting the good and the bad, completely abdicating the responsibility of Congress to determine where spending should or should not occur. To put this in perspective, this amendment contains a cut to regular discretionary spending that is about the size of the entire agriculture discretionary budget for the year. It's about the equivalent of eliminating all discretionary funding for the Department of Transportation or the full annual budgets of the Coast Guard and Customs and Border Patrol combined. As written, this amendment is an across-the-board cut that holds no program safe from harm. Defense spending, which is already facing potentially devastating sequestration cuts, is cut by another $10 billion. It would cut war funding by $1.6 billion, directly affecting our troops who are putting their lives on the line in Afghanistan and other areas of conflict. This amendment also cuts funding for our veterans, $200 million, potentially endangering the quality of their care and making the statement that Congress is willing to go back on commitments to our vets. And the list of other unwise cuts, side effects go on. Finally, this amendment goes against the precedent of previous emergency supplementals, which did not contain these extreme offsets. I yield myself 30 seconds.
Additional 30 seconds.
I believe we can and should attempt to budget for disasters, as we did under the BCA. There are times when a disaster simply goes beyond our ability to offset. Hurricane Sandy is one of those times. I urge a defeat of the amendment.
Gentleman reserves his time.
Yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from New York.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise in strong opposition to the Mulvaney Amendment. It would make indiscriminate across-the-board cuts. It would create a $2.1 billion shortfall in military pay, take $529 million from military health care, $1.4 billion support for our troops in Afghanistan. Even before the Mulvaney Amendment, the Joint Chief of Staff say we are on the brink of creating a hollow force. It would also cut care for wounded warriors after they come home, reducing veterans' medical services by more than $800 million. And here at home, the amendment would eliminate $650 million in funds to repair, rebuild, and expand highways and bridges. It would cut more than 139,000 low-income pregnant women, infants, and young children from the WIC program. It would take $500 million from the National Institutes of Health for research into cures for diseases like cancer, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. On many occasions, Democrats and Republicans came together to meet these urgent needs caused by major disasters in all the parts of the nation. We didn't say we must first cut support for armed forces and veterans and reduce investments in research. Let's not do that now.
Gentleman from South Carolina.
In closing, Madam Chair, I'll just say I don't like across-the-board cuts any more than anybody else does. I offered other alternatives. They were ruled out of order. But I would put it to my colleagues, just tell me what you're willing to do without. Are we willing and able to do without anything so that these people can get this money this year? That's the question that I want to debate. That's what I'm looking for my colleagues across the aisle. Are there no savings? Are there no reductions that we could put in place this year so these folks get this money? And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
I yield the balance of the time to Mr. Visclosky of Indiana.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 30 seconds.
I appreciate the chairman yielding, and I would simply conclude by saying one of my colleagues mentioned that we have a crisis. We do have a crisis of indecision in this chamber. We're under a continuing resolution. This committee is not allowed to complete its work. That creates inefficiencies at the Department of Defense, endangering our security. The chairman talked about the impact on across-the-board cuts and sequestration, and now we're going to pile on with more cuts. The fact is, the goal the gentleman is looking for is not going to happen, and I would simply give you one example. By stringing out acquisition and modernization, you increase the cost to the American taxpayer. I would ask my colleagues to oppose this amendment.
All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair, I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Gentleman from South Carolina has asked for a recorded vote. A recorded vote is requested. Those in favor of taking this vote via a recorded vote shall rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in Part A of House Report 113-1. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon has been debating $17 billion in hurricane relief aid for Hurricane Sandy for New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. They wrapped up there with a debate on an amendment by Mick Mulvaney of South Carolina, which, according to CQ, would offset the base $17 billion with across-the-board cuts of 1.63% to both defense and domestic spending. First vote here, first of two. This is a 15-minute vote, and more amendment debates still to come on the House floor. We get a preview of that and some background on the bill from a Capitol Hill reporter. We are joined by congressional correspondent for the New York Times, Jonathan Weissman, up on Capitol Hill. Why is the House taking up this disaster bill that's been broken up into several parts?
Well, basically, John Boehner and the Republican leadership are trying to have it, let all its members have it their way. So if you look at it, Republicans who don't want to vote for the whole package can vote for some aid on a stripped-down bill. They don't have to vote for the big $33 billion amendment that will come on later, and then they can prove their fiscal bona fides Or, if they want, they can prove that they are going to be giving the whole kit and caboodle to the Northeast. Remember, there are Northeast Republicans here, and much of the Republican conference are badly divided on how much money should be in the Sandy relief package.
Well, what is the price tag on that whole kit and caboodle you're talking about?
The whole kit and caboodle adds up to $60 billion. That's because about nearly $10 billion already passed to boost the flood insurance program. That happened about a week and a half ago. They're going to vote then on a $27 billion $17 billion package, and then a $33 billion package. Add it all together, you get to 60.
Well, take us back a little bit. Republican leaders opted not to take up the bill in the closing days of the 112th Congress. Why didn't they take it up then, and what prompted them to change their minds and take up similar legislation now?
Well, you'll remember that back then we had the fiscal cliff deal, and the fiscal cliff deal was a lot for Republicans to swallow because it allowed tax rates to rise and rise pretty sharply on the affluent. A lot of Republicans didn't want to vote for that, and then John Boehner just didn't have the stomach to then turn around right after that and put a $60 billion hurricane relief bill on the floor. He just couldn't do it. So he said, look, we're not going to do that. Let's come back in the next Congress and deal with it. That led to a really very loud, very public rupture with Northeastern Republicans who felt betrayed, who said that they had been promised this vote and that at the last minute it had been pulled out from under them, and they were very publicly attacking John Boehner, their speaker. Remember, Chris Christie, the New Jersey governor, said that Boehner had basically double-crossed him. This got John Boehner back into negotiations, and he decided, okay, we're going to do it this way. We're going to try to construct a vote that can get the money to the Northeast through a very divided Republican conference.
Well, on this House bill, what's the most likely outcome of the bill when it comes up for final votes?
I expect that in the end they will come up with the votes, but I think that final vote, the vote on the $33 billion amendment, which was drafted by Rodney Frelinghuysen, a Republican of New Jersey, that is going to take Democratic votes to pass. I do not think you'll even get a majority of Republicans to vote for the Frelinghuysen amendment. And it may be that you do not get a majority of Republicans to vote for the final package. But I do believe that with Democratic support, you'll probably they probably will squeak out passage on the full $50 billion today.
And how about over in the Senate? When are they expected to act on it?
If they can get unanimous consent, they might be able to come in, just bring in a few people and voice vote it, maybe even this week. More likely, it will pass by voice vote or even by unanimous consent next week.
What's the state of the recovery in New Jersey, New York? How are things going so far?
Well, I guess it's not very good because one of the ways that Republicans from that area have been able to garner support is to bring some of their colleagues up there. There were Republicans who voted against that $10 billion tranche of money for the flood insurance program, who then were brought up by Peter King and Lobiondo, some of the Republicans from the area, and they came back and were a little shocked by what they saw and have come back and publicly said, now I will support this. So I think that once you see it up close and personal, especially on those Jersey beaches, I think that it's having an impact.
Did that first go around with the legislation not coming forward? From what you're reporting and hearing, is that leaving still a little bit bitter taste in the mouth of people like Peter King or other Republicans from the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area?
Peter King swears that he is completely over it. I remember that the press conference that he gave the day, just hours after he had his rupture explosion at Boehner, he said, oh, that's just ancient history. I know it was last night, but it's ancient history. He thinks he's he's beyond it, but I'll tell you, I talked to some Republicans yesterday who were still very sore at King. I mean, Peter King had some very personal things to say. He said, don't come to New York to raise money for your campaigns and then turn around and trash New York Republicans. And I think people did feel like that Pete King had actually gotten a little too personal in those attacks.
Jonathan Weissman, congressional correspondent for the New York Times. You can follow him on Twitter at Jonathan Weissman and read his articles at nytimes.com. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
And the House now is voting on that Mulvaney amendment. The amendment would offset the base $17 billion with across-the-board cuts to defense and domestic programs and spending of 1.6%. The Rogers substitute, the next vote, 5-minute vote, that's the base of $17 billion, which the Associated Press says is aimed at immediate Sandy recovery needs, including $5.4 billion for New York, New Jersey transit systems and $5.4 billion for the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Disaster Relief Aid Fund. Still some time left in this amendment. We'll bring you next the Democratic leadership in the House calling this morning for Republicans calling to reject the Republicans' amendments that would decrease the funding for Sandy relief. The aid package obviously up on the floor this afternoon for debate. In this briefing, they touch on other issues, including remarks about gun control and more. We'll show you as much as we can as this vote continues.
Good morning, everyone. Are we ready? Javier Becerra, Chairman of the Democratic Caucus. I'm joined by our Vice Chairman, Joe Crowley, and we're fortunate to have with us the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, Nita Lowey. And with us as well is newly elected Congresswoman Elizabeth Esty, who is a representative from Connecticut and is the representative for the areas that were impacted by the Newtown tragedy. We just finished a robust 9 a.m. caucus meeting, great participation from members. They are ready to go. We know there's some unfinished business from the previous session. We know that we must deal with the issues confronting our country in terms of school safety, gun violence. We understand that we must continue to create jobs for Americans. And we know that we have to do this together, working with our Republican colleagues. And so we are ready. And the first sign will come today when we take on extremely important legislation dealing with the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy. And Democrats are ready. We are in the minority in the House of Representatives, but we are ready to deliver the support that those affected victims and families expect of their government. We are ready to help our fellow Americans get back to work, and we think this is an appropriate way to signal to the American public that we can work together. And so we're hoping that not only this legislation on Superstorm Sandy, but we hope quick progress on dealing with gun violence in a bipartisan fashion shows the American people that Congress learned from the lessons of last session's dysfunctional House of Representatives, that we can get things done, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and that the election in November 2012 meant something, that it had consequences, and we understand that it is up to the newly elected members of Congress in the House and the Senate to get their work done. And so we're very much looking forward to taking to the floor today to support the resources that are needed by the families who for more than 2 months have withstood the tragedy and the pain and are waiting to hear from their fellow Americans, especially those who are elected to represent them in Congress, on being there with them to work alongside the rest of America. So with that, let me ask our Vice Chairman, Joe Crowley, to make some remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Joe Crowley from Queens and Bronx, New York, Vice Chairman of the Democratic Caucus. I'm very pleased to be here today, particularly this being our first caucus of the 113th Congress, and congratulate Javier on his chairmanship, but also an opportunity to welcome, in many respects, getting people ready to go to work, our freshman class, all 49. Were there bright and early, and we really appreciate that, and particularly to have Elizabeth Esty with us here today, in many respects representing that freshman class. We had a very informative caucus meeting this morning, particularly as it pertains to the issue of Sandy, Superstorm Sandy. And I know the next person I'm going to introduce will give you more details about where we stand. But let me just say, as Javier has mentioned, the people of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania have waited 2.5 months too long. The effect of that wait is manyfold. It will take longer for the region to get back up on its feet. It will take longer for small businesses to open and operate again. But maybe most importantly, it will be longer for people to put their lives back together. And I'm talking both from physical damage, but certainly to mental anguish as well, some of which I think we have yet to see the effects of. But we are acting today. It appears as we will act today. It's my hope that we will act today. And I think in many respects we're led by the Democratic caucus in ensuring that the legislation passes today as well. Democrats understand the needs of people, especially people who are victims of natural disaster. And the Congress will stand today to do what we ought to have done at least 2 months ago, and that is to respond to the victims of this horrible Superstorm Sandy. With that, I'd like to introduce the ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee, as well, whose district was affected by Superstorm Sandy, my good friend Nita Lowey.
Thank you, Joe Crowley. Thank you, Javier Becerra. We're off to a great start with an extraordinary freshman class, and I'm so pleased that at our first meeting, the point that was emphasized, and there was so much support in the Democratic caucus, is that we're an American, and Americans respond no matter where the tragedy is. And for those of us in either New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut, we visited the sites. Businesses totally flooded out. I was amazed when we actually look at the numbers, 8.1 million people without power, some for a week, some for months. So the fact that we're bringing this to the floor today, 79 days after the disaster. Remember, it was 10 days that we responded to Katrina. This is 79 days. But I'm so pleased that those people who've lost their homes, lost their livelihood, and 650,000 homes were totally destroyed. So although many of our businesses are back on their feet, many of the homeowners have gotten help, and I'm very proud of the federal government and state and local governments that we've been able to work together. There are many who are anxiously waiting for this support. Now, number one, there's no excuse that the House did not pass the Senate bill. They could have passed the Senate bill. There was no reason they didn't pass the Senate bill. But I'm very pleased that the first order of business in the 113th Congress is coming up today so people in our communities can finally see relief. Now, the package is not all perfect. It doesn't meet the $82 billion that was originally asked for by the states. It doesn't fully fund the community development block grant monies. The bill does not include what we think was superior Senate language on the flexibility and cost share of the Army Corps projects. And it doesn't sufficiently assist many of the health facilities that lost tens of millions of dollars due to the storm. However, despite this, we are very enthusiastic that this bill is coming. We must support the Frelinghuysen Amendment. We must support the Rogers Amendment. And we must oppose the Mulvaney Amendment, which is an across-the-board cut to offset the costs of disaster relief. I want to repeat this point again. In the United States of America, we respond to disasters. All Americans respond to disasters. We don't ask for offsets. We make sure that the communities are getting the resource they need so that they can help their business, help the homeowners, replace the terrible disasters that we've seen in New York. There are people that couldn't go to work for days because of all the tunnels that were flooded. There were 146 major disaster declarations in the last 2 years. 146 major disaster declarations in the last 2 years. So there isn't a disaster that isn't responded to by the United States of America to help people deal with their catastrophes in their area. So again, the bill was written so that when one region is devastated, we all respond. It's imperative that we pass this package today. And now it is my real pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Esty. We're so happy to have her. She is representing this amazing freshman class. And she's also the Congresswoman who represents those families in Newtown. We all share the heartache that I know you all experienced it, and we are pleased that you're here today, and we expect that we're going to do something about it. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to Chairman Becerra, thank you to Vice Chairman Crowley, and thank you to my good friend Nita Lowey for that kind introduction. My name is Elizabeth Esty, and I represent Connecticut's 5th District. And I also represent in that the community of Newtown, Connecticut. And I'm serving as one of 12 vice chairs of the Congressional Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. Our vice chairs have a wide range of experience that they're bringing to bear on these important problems, and they reflect the diversity of our wonderful House caucus. We are focused on a comprehensive approach that will deal with true gun safety regulations and protect the rights of responsible gun owners, but also deal with mental health issues and, most importantly, keeping our children and our communities safe. We want to bring unique ideas to the table to work to save lives and keep families safe. Yesterday, we had a very productive meeting with Vice President Biden, along with various members of the Cabinet, including Attorney General Eric Holder, Homeland Security Secretary Napolitano, and HHS Secretary Sebelius. It was a really productive conversation, and I was encouraged, as I think the other members of the task force were encouraged, by their commitment to reduce gun violence in this country and to help our communities. Over the next several weeks, we will be working very hard with a series of hearings and meetings to generate the sorts of solutions that the country deserves to have at this critical time, to meet with different constituencies, to get all the best ideas on the table, and to present them, again, to keep our communities safe with a comprehensive set of policy proposals. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. I want to say to all Americans, the community of Newtown appreciates your thoughts and prayers. They are going through a very difficult time. Our first responders, the teachers, the students, but as a resilient community, just as this is a great and resilient country, as we are seeing with Superstorm Sandy, Americans step up to the plate, we get the job done, and I appreciate the opportunity to serve. Thank you very much.
Elizabeth, thank you very much for your service, and we're very much looking forward to your representation as a new member from Connecticut and what you bring to the table here in Washington, D.C. I just want to add one last point. All those families that are waiting for this relief have been pulling their own weight for quite some time. They've had the help of a bipartisan group of governors. Certainly, we've all seen and heard Governor Christie of New Jersey, Governor Cuomo of New York, but it's been a bipartisan effort at those local levels. And we here in the House of Representatives, part of the Democratic caucus, are ready to pull our weight and provide the support necessary to pass this legislation. We hope our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle are ready to pull their weight and provide the support necessary to pass this essential legislation, which is more than 2 months in the waiting, to provide the relief for as a result of Superstorm Sandy. So with that, we'll take any questions.
Congresswoman Lowey, how confident are you that you have the votes for the $50 billion package, and how confident are you that you can turn back the Mulvaney amendment, which I know you mentioned you support?
Let me say I feel very confident that we will have almost every vote of the Senate caucus. This has been a bipartisan effort. We've been speaking to Governor Cuomo as recently as last night, Governor Christie, and I know the Republicans, led by Peter King, Mike King, Michael Grimm, and the other Republican members from New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut and Pennsylvania, who feel passionately about this. This is not a Democratic issue. This is not a Republican issue. And I just hope, as Javier said, that they pull their weight and they have enough votes to join with the Democrats to pass this bill. You know, the people, the 8.1 million people, the beaches that were destroyed, the businesses on the beaches in New Jersey, for example, in New York, that are trying to get ready for the summer. This is billions of dollars. The hospitals that were destroyed. You don't get Republican pain when a hospital is destroyed. You don't get Republican or Democrat pain when you see people who lost their 101 people lost their lives, by the way. So I'm counting on my Republicans with encouragement from the governors to get sufficient votes to join with the Democrats and pass this bill.
Question on guns.
Certainly.
We understand that an assault weapons ban is part of the recommendations that the Vice President is considering. And Senator Reid has suggested that he's not confident that could pass the Senate. And even the President yesterday said he doesn't think he can get everything he wanted. Isn't the political reality of this issue that an assault weapons ban is politically almost impossible to get through Congress?
I have to tell you, having just arrived here, I am part of a group of freshmen who believe we need to not accept the answers of the past and we need to do better. This is a wake-up call. Newtown, Connecticut is a wake-up call to elected officials to do better for this country, and I believe that there is will out there to take on comprehensive reform. And I will be part of that process, whether we get the votes in the end. I can't say that. I'm not a good predictor at this point, but I do know this. We need to take on effective, responsible efforts, and I will be supporting an assault weapons ban, and we certainly will be pursuing vigorously high-capacity magazines, which were used in this and virtually every mass killing in this country. We need to do better as a country.
Even if we can't pass it, there's a chance it won't ever come up for a vote in the House.
Well, again, it's my job to advocate strongly for my community and for all these communities. That's what I'll be doing, and working with leadership to get the votes we need. And the American public. I believe the American public is
The noes are 258. The noes have it. The amendment is not adopted. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in Part A of House Report 113-1. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Chairman, I request a recorded vote